Hey, what's going on everyone? It's McCall here, and last week a gentleman hit me up through the comments section asking to learn a little bit more about TTL. He thought that would be a really good video request and I give it a 2 thumbs up. I can't believe I haven't done a TTL video already. So I moved into my small home studio just downstairs from my office, and we are gonna split this into a 2-part video series because if you wanna learn about TTL, you also have to understand your camera's metering modes as well as exposure compensation. So the video you're about to watch is gonna be about metering and exposure comp, and then part 2 of this video is gonna be all about TTL. I plan on making this the absolute best metering / exposure comp / TTL mini video series currently on YouTube. I want this to be super immersive and I want all of you guys to be able to learn something from this today, okay? So let's talk about metering. Since metering is so tricky, I'm gonna be reading this directly from my phone. In case you all are interested, I am starting on my blog series. I just published my very first one 2 weeks ago by the time you watch this video about being professional. The one that you're about to read is gonna be all about metering, exposure compensation, and TTL in case you wanna read about this stuff versus only watching a video. Go ahead and check the description below and it should be published by that time, all right? So, metering. What you need to understand first is there are 3 basic types of metering. It doesn't matter what manufacturer you go through. They might call them slightly different, metering modes, but they all basically mean the same thing. Now also understand there are more than 3 metering modes available, even on the A6500 that I'm filming with right now. I'm gonna go over the 3 most common ones that pros and amateurs alike will be using, okay? So starting off is going to be matrix metering, also known as multi-zone. Matrix metering divides the entire frame into a matrix, samples the light from every part of the matrix, and uses it to determine the best exposure that will balance the dark and bright areas of the scene. Matrix metering uses a very complex algorithm and is best used when the scene is evenly lit. This is usually the default metering mode most people go to. Now moving on to the next one, that is going to be called spot metering, also known as partial metering. It is the most difficult to use, but also the most precise of metering modes and will measure exposure only from a small spot right at the center of the frame. Spot metering is used when you want total control of the scene and only want exposure metered on the exact subject point. Okay, and moving on to the 3rd and final metering mode we're gonna talk about today, center weighted metering. This metering falls in the middle of the matrix and spot metering mode, so it's kind of in between there. Similar to matrix, center weighted metering measures light throughout the frame but provides greater bias towards the center, meaning it's somewhat like a spot metering mode, but it's also going to take into account all the other different light outputs that are around that specific subject. I hope that kind of makes sense for you guys. To help you all better understand these metering modes, I'm going to give you all some different scenarios as well as show you in live time how these metering modes affect your current image. That's why I got this rig built out here with the Ninja 2 recorder. I'll be able to record the back of my display so that you all can see this in live time. And just so you all know, I'm using the Sony transmitter with the flagship HVL F60M and the A7R2 and their 7200G master lens. So we're gonna go through the different metering modes and I'm gonna show you all how each one affects your current image. All right, so as you can see here, I got my camera set up and I got it pointed at our model of choice today, which is a pair of my Adidas shoes. You're probably wondering like why I didn't get a real model. Doesn't really make sense to have someone sit here for like 20 or 30 minutes while I babble on about nerdy gear talk, right? So anyways, the reason why I chose this specific pair of shoes though is because look at all of the color it has. I have pink shoelaces, pink inside, I got pink on the outside of the shoe as well, outlining various areas. It's also got a somewhat bright but also kind of a dark teal color going on, as well as matte black and a dark gray with a little bit of chrome. So this pair of shoes has almost every color out there that a camera can see, that would change the internal metering reading of your camera. So that's why I chose this. So let's hop into my function menu here, and I'm gonna go into metering mode. As you can see, I have multi-metering set up right now. And based off the image that you're looking at, it's actually a little bit overexposed. Because remember, with multi, it's basically taking an average of everything in the scene. So you see that black backdrop back there? It's taking that into effect. It's also hitting those pink shoelaces and that bright teal color. And also it's taking note of the white table that the shoes are resting on. And internally, the camera believes this is the most digitally accurate readout based off the values it's given. Now, whenever I move it around a little bit, you will see that it changes, because now that there's more black in the frame, it's obviously going to start getting brighter. So that's kind of how the multi-reading works. Now, a scenario when you might want to use this is whenever you're out at some kind of press conference or something, run around, when there's a lot of even lighting. You know, a building is probably going to be evenly lit. Even if it's not the best lighting, it's probably going to have consistent lighting, and that is when you would probably want to use multi-metering. Now, moving on to the next one, I'm going to go into center metering. So this is the center weighted average, meaning it's mostly taking into account for what's right there in the middle of the sensor, but it's also paying attention to the other colors going on around it. As you can see here, it just got even brighter than the first one, because now it's taking into account for most of the black backdrop that it sees. So center weighted average metering, you might want to use that in like a portrait kind of scenario. For the most part, skin tones are the most crucial part of a good portrait. So you might want to use center weighted average if you're taking several pictures of people of all different, skin tones and whatnot, but you don't want to have to do the manual lighting output every time. That's when you might want to use something like this. Now, when you go down to spot, once I select this, you can see that as I move it across the shoe, it's starting to get brighter and get darker. It's constantly changing, because remember, spot only cares about what's right there in the middle of the frame. There's no average, there's no like real algorithm going on here. It's looking at what's just right there in the middle of the frame, just a small little spot. So when you might want to use something like this is, like I used it for macro shooting a while back. I was taking images of specific leaves and whatnot, and I was using TTL because these trees and whatnot were all different colors, and I had my speed light set up and I was using spot metering, and I was getting very accurate results with this. So now you should have a pretty good understanding of how the metering modes affect your image. I was able to show you that in live time. Now we're going to talk about exposure compensation and then flash compensation. All right, now pay close attention because these are very tricky. So as I go back into my function menu here, I'm gonna go into multi-metering mode. Now, up here on the Sony Alpha line of cameras, we have an exposure compensation dial. I think just about every camera out there has exposure comp. They may or may not have a dedicated dial, but nonetheless, I think for the most part, cameras do have it. Now, with exposure compensation used in conjunction with metering is very awesome. It's actually a really awesome tool whenever you're trying to get really quick pictures of various subjects. So let's do another scenario here where you're actually trying to get, pictures of, let's say you're going from indoors to outdoors, okay? But you're carrying your speed light with you, right? Now, whenever you go inside, it's obviously going to be darker than outside, let's say in a sunny environment, right? So you come indoors and it's super bright. Well, with exposure compensation, with this dial up here, I'm able to dial that down. As you can see there, I've now just dialed in to negative 1.7 EV so that I can get a better readout of the image I'm trying to get. I'm now getting a more exposure correct result. So that is how you're able to use exposure compensation. Now keep in mind, exposure comp does not work in manual mode. Why? Because TTL and metering are for automatic style settings. TTL is technically automatic, even though you can adjust it and fine tune it a little bit. So it's not gonna work in manual mode because your camera's like, nope, you're in charge of everything. So that is how exposure compensation works. I'm able to do that throughout all the different metering modes. Doesn't matter which one I'm in, I'm able to fine tune it. All right, so now we're gonna talk about flash compensation. As you can see here, my shoes are pretty well evenly lit. These look okay. I'm gonna go ahead and take a picture right now with my flash at TTL, and let's take a look at it. All right, and that's how it looks. It looks fine. It looks, you know, evenly lit. Nothing looks too crazy. The highlights look okay. Now I'm gonna go back into my function menu and I'm gonna crank up the flash compensation. Let's go all the way up to +3 just so that you can instantly see what this does. Now as I go in here, it is obviously much brighter. Now right here, I'm not able to see my settings, but over here in the flash, it definitely fired a lot brighter than the previous image. I could hear the louder pop. So that's kind of how flash compensation works versus exposure comp. Flash still might slightly adjust ISO ratings and whatnot because, you know, these mirrorless cameras have pretty outstanding, you know, ISO capabilities. So they might touch on that just a little bit, but for the most part, it only adjusts the flash's output, okay? All right, so that pretty much wraps up the video right there. Hopefully you now have a much better understanding of metering and exposure compensation. Stay tuned because like I said, this is a 2-part mini video series, and go ahead and click the link right up here above to go onto the TTL video when it's available, okay? So I poured my heart and soul into this little video series, so if you enjoyed this, be sure to give it a thumbs up and please subscribe to my YouTube channel for those weekly uploads, all right? So as always, get out there, start shooting and have some fun, and stay tuned for the next video. Take it easy. My name's McCall.